The mop handle slapped into Dr. Thomas Mitchell's weathered hands as a young nurse hurried past. "Clean up room 5, old-timer," she smirked, not bothering to look at his ID badge. 15 minutes later, those same hands would be deep in a patient's chest, saving a life that no one else in the hospital could. The hospital corridor reeked of antiseptic as Dr. Mitchell absorbed the insult with quiet dignity. His stooped shoulders and thinning silver hair reflected in the polished wall tiles. Despite his 72 years, his eyes remained sharp, carrying the focus of a man who performed surgeries under artillery fire in Vietnam. A small veteran's pin gleamed quietly on his faded but immaculate scrubs. Thomas looked down at the mop, then at his surgeon's ID badge hanging visibly from his neck. The nurse had already vanished around the corner, leaving him standing there, yet another invisible old man in a world rushing forward. He didn't call after her. 40 years as a military surgeon had taught him when words were necessary and when silence spoke louder. He simply placed a mop against the wall and continued toward the surgeon's lounge, his back bent but his dignity intact. 2 residents passed by, whispering loudly. "Who's that old guy?" "New custodial staff." "Must be. Looks ancient. Probably should be in a retirement home instead of wandering hospital halls." Their laughter echoed down the corridor as Thomas continued forward, each step measured and deliberate. His arthritic fingers closed around his binder of surgical notes, the valve replacement he'd been reviewing for the past 2 days. Complex case. High risk, but he'd performed this procedure hundreds of times, from field hospitals in Desert Storm to state-of-the-art operating rooms. Let them laugh. In the operating room, age didn't matter, only skill and steadiness. And despite his bent frame and wrinkled hands, Dr. Thomas Mitchell had both in abundance. Outside the surgeon's lounge, a young white doctor leaned against the doorframe, scrolling through his phone. His scrubs looked fresh from packaging, his confidence even fresher, the kind that hadn't earned its place yet but assumed it already had. As Thomas approached, the young doctor looked up and smirked. "Wrong door, Grandpa. Custodial closet is down the hall." Thomas paused, meeting the young man's gaze with calm eyes that had witnessed battlefield horrors and miracle recoveries. Without a word, he turned the handle and walked in, leaving the doctor's mockery hanging in the air. Inside, several surgeons glanced up, confusion quickly sliding into dismissal. One muttered to another, "Janitor's getting bold these days." Another chuckled, "Maybe he's lost. Should we call geriatrics?" No one greeted him. No one offered the professional courtesy of a simple nod. Thomas walked past them to his assigned locker, opening it with unhurried precision. He retrieved his surgical binder, complete with detailed notes on the aortic valve replacement schedule for that afternoon. High-risk patient. Multiple complications possible. He'd been studying the case for days. At the coffee machine, he poured himself a cup, his movements slow but deliberate. Years of military precision hadn't left him, even if his vertebrae had begun to curve with age. A senior doctor walked by, tossing a crumpled paper toward the trash. It missed, landing at Thomas's feet. "Pick that up, would you?" the doctor said without looking back. Thomas stared at the paper for a moment. He didn't bend to retrieve it, not because his back ached, though it did after decades of standing over operating tables and wounded soldiers, but because he wasn't there to be anyone's janitor. In the corner, Dr. Halsey, the hospital administrator, glanced up briefly. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, saying nothing. Even those who knew often chose silence. Thomas checked his watch. Surgery in 30 minutes. He adjusted his reading glasses, took a sip of coffee, and turned to leave, his back as straight as his aging spine would allow. Not because he didn't feel the sting of their judgment, but because 40 years in the military had taught him that dignity is often born in restraint. Let them whisper. The operating room will reveal the truth soon enough. The hospital's sterile calm shattered in an instant. Code blue or 2. Repeat, code blue or 2. The announcement crackled to the intercom, sharp and urgent, cutting through conversations and casual dismissals. For a split second, time froze. Then chaos erupted. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Nurses grabbed gloves. Surgeons barked orders. A crash cart rattled past in a blur of metal instruments and adrenaline. In the surgeon's lounge, coffee cups clattered as chairs scraped backward. Conversations died mid-sentence. Everyone stood wide-eyed, scanning each other's faces, waiting for anyone, to step forward. "Who's on call?" someone asked, voice tight with tension. "Dr. Westfield," replied a nurse, already checking her phone. "But he's off-site, minimum 20 minutes out." "The patient doesn't have 20 minutes," another voice countered. The words hung in the air like a ticking clock, cold and final. "We need a lead surgeon now." A resident's voice rose, edged with panic. Aortic dissection, BP dropping fast. But no one moved. Not one of the confident doctors who had been exchanging jokes minutes earlier. Not the young surgeon who had mocked the old janitor. Not the ones who had whispered about retirement homes and wrong doors. They all stood frozen, caught between their titles and their fear. Then from the back of the room, calm and even, came a voice that cut through the noise like a scalpel. "I can handle it." Heads whipped around. Standing by the doorway, framed in the fluorescent light, was Dr. Thomas Mitchell. His posture was relaxed despite his stooped shoulders. His eyes, dark, focused, unwavering, carried the gravity of someone who had stared down death many times and never blinked. A junior surgeon stammered, "Wait, you're..." But Thomas didn't wait for recognition. "I need vitals, scans, and a team prepped in or two immediately." His voice carried the unmistakable tone of command, not loud but irrefutable. A voice that had directed battlefield triage units and trained generations of military surgeons. For a moment, confusion lingered. Then the hospital administrator stepped forward. "This is Dr. Mitchell, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, former military surgeon general." Her voice carried no apology, just fact. The room shifted. Orders were shouted. Feet scrambled to follow. In less than 60 seconds, the entire atmosphere transformed. No more assumptions, no more laughter. Just clip confirmations and professionals falling into line because suddenly there was a captain at the helm. Thomas passed a nurse who had handed him a mop earlier. Her face burned red with the memory. He didn't slow down. There was no time for shame or vindication. A life hung in the balance. Everything else could wait. The double doors of operating room 2 swung open with a soft whoosh, and Dr. Thomas Mitchell stepped inside. The air was thick with antiseptic and urgency. Overhead surgical lights cast harsh white halos onto the patient lying unconscious beneath blue drapes. A monitor beeped erratically, charting the failing rhythm of a heart losing its fight. Around the table stood a hastily assembled team, a scrub nurse arranging instruments, an anesthesiologist monitoring vitals, and the young doctor who had mocked Thomas earlier, standing uncertainly at the head of the table, mask on, eyes wide with fear. Thomas approached the sink without a word and began scrubbing in. The brush moved over his gnarled, age-spotted hands in swift, methodical strokes. The same hands that had performed emergency surgeries in field hospitals from Vietnam to Kuwait. Soap swirled down the drain like thoughts being washed away. No room for resentment. No space for ego. Only the patient mattered now. The young surgeon swallowed visibly as Thomas approached. "Sir, I," began, recognition and embarrassment battling in his eyes. "Vitals." Thomas cut him off gently. This wasn't the time for apologies. The anesthesiologist answered quickly, almost too eagerly. "BP 58/35, irregular rhythm, severe arrhythmia. CT shows aortic dissection type A." Thomas nodded, his stoop back straightening instinctively as he reached for surgical gloves. Years seemed to fall away from him as he took position at the operating table. Prepped the aortic graft. "I need arterial line, rib spreader, and bypass ready." His voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. The team moved as one. The entire dynamic shifted. Chaos transformed into precision. Every second now had purpose. Every motion economy. The scrub nurse, the same one who had thrust a mop into his hands hours earlier, handed him a scalpel. Her hands trembled slightly, shame evident behind her mask. Thomas took the instrument without comment or hesitation. This was not the moment for a personal reckoning. This was the moment for saving a life. The first incision was smooth, deliberate, surgical. Thomas's bent shoulders became irrelevant. His hands moved with the steadiness of a much younger man. The chest cavity opened to reveal the heart, swollen, struggling. A ticking time bomb of ruptured tissue clamped the aorta. Suction here. More exposure on the left. His voice guided every movement like a conductor leading an orchestra through a complex piece they'd never rehearsed. The young surgeon watched in awe, barely breathing. The nurse followed every instruction as if seeking redemption through perfect assistance. Even the anesthesiologist leaned forward, witnessing something approaching artistry. Minutes stretched. Blood pressure dropped, then stabilized. Thomas's hands never hesitated, finding and repairing the dissection with movements that spoke of thousands of previous surgeries. His focus never wavered, despite the sweat beading on his forehead or the ache that must have been building in his curved spine. Beginning to close. Vitals stable. We're past the critical point. The monitor's rhythm had steadied, the crisis averted. When it was done, Thomas stepped back, peeling off his gloves. His posture returned to its stooped angle, as if the surgery had allowed him a temporary reprieve from age's burden. Good work, everyone. Keep him monitored in post-op. He should stabilize fully within the hour. The silence that followed wasn't from shock or surprise anymore. It was respect. The doors of operating room 2 closed behind Dr. Thomas Mitchell, sealing away the scent of surgical success and the hum of stabilizing monitors. In the corridor, the usual midday bustle had resumed, but something felt different. Nurses moved with new attentiveness, eyes lingering on name badges they passed. Conversations hushed when Thomas walked by, replaced by nods of acknowledgement. Word had already begun to spread through the hospital's efficient grapevine. The old janitor had just performed a masterful emergency aortic repair. Only he wasn't a janitor. He was a new chief of cardiothoracic surgery, a decorated veteran with 40 years of surgical experience from battlefield medicine to leading military hospitals. Hours later, the patient, Mr. Donovan, a 48-year-old teacher and father too, was wheeled into recovery. The monitors hummed with steady rhythms. Color had returned to his cheeks. The worst had passed. He wouldn't have made it without Dr. Mitchell, murmured a recovery nurse to her colleague. They say he operated on wounded soldiers under gunfire in Desert Storm. And we treated him like he was nothing, her colleague replied quietly. Later that afternoon, in a hastily arranged meeting in the surgical wing, Dr. Halsey addressed the gathered staff. Her tone was formal but carried unmistakable reverence. I want to commend Dr. Mitchell for his exceptional skill during today's emergency. His quick action saved a patient's life under extreme circumstances. She turned toward Thomas, who stood to the side, hands clasped behind his back in military habit. We are fortunate to have someone of his experience here, and I expect all departments to extend the respect his rank and abilities warrant. Applause followed, awkward at first, then stronger. Thomas acknowledged it with a slight nod, but inside, he wasn't looking for acclaim. He just wanted to be seen. As people dispersed, the young doctor who had mocked him outside the lounge approached. His swagger was gone, replaced by genuine contrition. Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry for earlier. I was completely out of line. Thomas studied him for a moment. He didn't lecture or shame him. Instead, he simply said, in the military, we learn to assess capabilities, not appearances. It's a good lesson for any doctor. The younger man nodded, face flushed. Yes, sir. It won't happen again. Good, Thomas replied, because our patients deserve better from all of us. For the rest of the day, Dr. Thomas Mitchell walked the halls not as an invisible old man, but as a respected surgeon. His stooped shoulders and weathered face hadn't changed, but perceptions had. The truth is, we all make snap judgments based on appearances. We see age and assuming capacity. We see a uniform or lack of one and assign value. Have you ever been misjudged or witnessed someone being dismissed because of how they looked? How did you respond? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember, respect isn't about agreeing with everyone. It's about recognizing the dignity in every person, regardless of their appearance.